keynote speaker, Dr. Kathleen Deloughery. She right now at DHS S&T. I'll just briefly read out her bio. So Deputy for Enduring Sciences Branch in Technology Center, DHS S&T, that's Science and Technology. In this role, she's responsible for overseeing a set of interrelated research activities across Social Science Technology Center, Hazard Awareness, Characterization Technology Center. I guess we wanted to hear, Kathleen, what exactly you have advice for the STEM folks. So with that, I'd like to invite Dr. Deloughery to educate us.
Great. So thank you for having me here today. I want to talk to you guys about technology, about science and engineering, but from a different perspective. I'm an economist and a social scientist who lead teams of social life and physical scientists and work in a department of mainly physical scientists and engineers. So I come at issues of technology from a very different perspective. And when I first started at DHS S&T, we were interested in assisting through social sciences S&T in successfully transitioning technologies by understanding the factors that influence either the success or the failure of those technologies to transition to end users. This was really an important topic when I first came to S&T. A GAO report had just come out looking at government R&D and noting that it was not transitioning to end users at the rate that we would want. Another report came out that showed that only 13% of technology projects that were over $6 million ended up being successful in the federal government. So this was a major issue that we needed to look at. And the government is a little bit different from private industry, right? We're not driven by profit. And therefore, some of the examination of technology acceptance isn't as thoroughly done. And what we found when we looked at this was that it is really rarely the complexity of the science that's at the heart of implementation failures. Instead, what's at the heart of those implementation failures is the lack of understanding as to how organizations operate, both internally and with their constituents. And that's what leads to the failure or success of a technology transition. So we built a whole portfolio of research around this space. We we created a model of technology transition that looks at variables that include the technology, the users, the advocates, the implementers, and the organization. And now we have two parallel research activities at DHS S&T, one of which I'm going to speak to you about today. Those two parallel activities are first, looking at the workforce organizational factors that impact whether or not a technology transitions into that organization. And the second, and the one I'm going to speak to you about, is how the public perceives DHS use of new and emerging technologies. So let me talk to you about a few examples where the government didn't get this right. So in 2009, body scanners were introduced at TSA checkpoints at airports around the country. Before that, we mostly just had metal detectors. The way that these worked is that in order to search for potential threats, a TSA officer would monitor the scanner and could, at that time, view a full body image of the traveler as they were standing in the scanner. Within a week of these body scanners being introduced into airports, it was trending across social media. There were lots of questions about the new security procedures, and there were lawsuits from groups that advocate for civil rights and civil liberties protections about individuals' privacy as they're traveling through the airport. This had consequences not only for the technology and the time and the money that was put into using that technology, but it had major impacts on the TSA workforce who are having to interact with the public as they're attempting to use this new technology. In the end, 250 scanners were removed from airports, and only those scanners that either already had or were retrofitted with privacy protecting software remained. However, it was a news story for a very long time, and it had the potential impact of eroding trust in the government use of this technology and the government ability to protect people's privacy. Another parallel story, in November 2021, so recently, the IRS announced that it was going to start using facial recognition technology to authenticate users creating new accounts. Again, this was a major news story. It was on the front page of the Washington Post for a while, and quite quickly, in February of 2022, so only 4 months later, the IRS announced that they were moving away from requiring third-party identification or third-party authentication of individuals using facial recognition. When we get this right, no one notices. But when the government gets this wrong, it becomes a story, and it has impacts, which I'll speak about a little bit later, to cost, to time, to public trust, and to national security. And as the pace of technology advance quickens, I expect that we'll see additional issues around technology implementation failures. So when I talk about public perception, who am I really talking about? Who do we need to think about as we're developing new technologies that are going to be used in government settings? Well, obviously, first and foremost, we care about the public who interacts with those technologies, right? They're the individuals that we have to protect and ensure that they're using the technology safely. But we also care about the research community who may be testing these technologies. We care about the advocacy groups who will advocate for the public on their behalf. We care about local, state, and federal legislators who are making law and policy around our ability to use these technologies. And we care about our operational partners, be they other governments, private sector companies, or within DHS, our operational components who interact with the public on a daily basis in their use of these technologies. So we started building a portfolio around how to assess public perceptions, right? So there's different ways that you can look at this. You can elicit information through interviews, focus groups, surveys, et cetera. You can observe individuals or content to try to see how people are reacting. So this could be content analysis, looking at how the technology and the procedure is being discussed online and in the media. Or it could be a behavioral observation where you're watching how people interact with the technology or don't interact with the technology to understand how the public is perceiving it. These, have different costs and benefits that we run through in deciding which one to use when. But what's really important to keep in mind is what we're talking about here, or we're talking about emerging technologies, right? How the public perceives emerging technologies is inevitably going to be a shifting terrain, right? So the public's perception of artificial intelligence technologies from 3 months ago might be a little bit different now that ChatGPT came out and more people are interacting with AI technologies, right? Or there might be outside events that impact how a public perceives the use of DHS or other government technology. And I can give an example of that in just a minute. So often when I speak to my engineering colleagues about this, the question I get back is, well, Kathleen, how can understanding public perception help? What if we learn that the public doesn't want DHS to use this technology? Do we just abandon it? And that answer is no. There's not a lot of black and white here. There's a lot of gray. So there's a huge space between DHS uses this technology however we want to in every use case, and we don't use the technology at all. There's also a broad expanse in the public, and the public fully 100% accepts this technology in this use case, and we don't at all. So how does understanding public perceptions help? In a few ways. First, we can identify specific use cases for initial implementation and rollout. For example, if we're looking at the use of drones in first responder communities, we might be much more willing as the public to accept that in a case where it's a search and rescue mission, as opposed to a case where they're tracking a criminal, right? So we understanding the use case and those use cases that people are more likely to accept is incredibly important. It also helps us better understand the views of specific communities and helps us create targeted messages for those communities. So are there differences in public perception across gender, across socioeconomic background, across race or ethnicity, right? And across age? And how do we use that information to communicate to the public in a way that's effective to them? And then the last piece, and I've touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to make it more explicit here, is that perception is not a single focus, right? There are many components to it. So when we're looking at the public perception of DHS use of a technology, we're considering the operational component that's going to use it, right? Is this TSA, CBP, FEMA, Secret Service, right? So who's actually going to be using it? We're looking at the technology itself, right? So is it an AI technology? Is it facial recognition? Is it mobile phone, geolocation? Is it license plate readers, right? And then we're looking at the specific use cases or contexts that it's being used. Is it to identify a victim of a crime? Is it to identify a perpetrator of a crime? Is it to identify whether or not someone is being deceptive at a security checkpoint, right? All of those come together and matter. And if we study public perceptions, we're able to disaggregate where the public has concerns and where they don't. Maybe it's the technology, maybe it's the use case, right? And that helps us build a strategy moving forward. Understanding public perceptions helps us as the government inform preventative steps that we can take to address those concerns. So both pre and post deployment of a new technology, we can build, we can use the best practices that we learn from the public perception to build and maintain trust with the community. And then the final piece is that understanding public perceptions helps us improve our strategic communication about why and how the technology is being used. It's not enough to create a great technology and throw it out there over the fence for use. You have to communicate with people about how they're going to interact with it, how it's safe for them, how their data will be stored, how their privacy and their rights will be protected, right? So that's a really important piece. So I'll run through a few examples of some work that we've done at DHS. So in one case, we worked with a developer who was developing an advanced screening technology for TSA, not the body scanners, a different one. And they wanted to better understand, people's willingness to trade off between security and safety and how much they're willing to, do what the government asks them to in order to get through a security checkpoint faster, right? So, we found that for the most part, the general public believes that screening should be more efficient, but that they're willing to wait if it means that the screeners are able to better identify threats to security before boarding the plane. We were specifically looking at shoe scanners, right? And right now you have to take off your shoes every time before you fly unless you're pre-check. And so we asked people about their willingness to limit shoe choices, right? If you could get through the security checkpoint faster, would you choose from only, this set of shoes? And for the most part, people were willing to do that. But there was a difference if it was just a TSA approved shoe versus a type of shoe. People are more willing to say, sure, I'll wear sneakers through the security checkpoint, but less willing to say, I'll wear the shoe that TSA approves to go through the security checkpoint. So that's an interesting and important distinction. We also looked at UAS use by first responders, so unmanned aerial systems, through a content analysis. So this was not through surveys and focus groups and interviews, but through looking at traditional media and what people are saying about first responder using UAS. And we found that the perception of law enforcement use of drones was much more negative than the perception of fire or EMT using drones. And really the key to this was around transparency. The community wants to understand why drones are being used and by whom. And I mentioned earlier that sometimes your study can be overwhelmed by events. We were examining this in the summer of 2020 when there were a lot of protests around the United States. And a lot of the concern was about using drones to identify people at protests, none of which we were doing, right? But that's what kind of came to the forefront in the media during our examination and really drove the potential negative perception of law enforcement use of drones as opposed to first responders as opposed to fire or EMT. And then the most recent study that we've done that's just finishing up now is looking at public perception of AI, machine learning, and facial recognition technologies. And we found some really interesting results from that. So just to highlight a few, there's a sizable minority of the population that has not yet solidified their views around the risks and benefits of these technologies and specifically about government use of them. So that means that we have an incredibly large opportunity to influence, but we also have an incredibly large opportunity that if we do it wrong, we can lose people's trust and they'll perceive the risks as higher than the benefits. So we're kind of at a precipice where we really need to get this right if we want to be able to use these emerging technologies for good going forward. We also found that when people did talk about the benefits of these technologies, that they were much more interested and cared more about security, privacy, and accuracy than they do about speed and convenience. Well, that's really interesting to DHS because a lot of our message, especially if you think of like checkpoints, centers around you will get through this checkpoint faster. It will be more convenient to you. You won't have to take off your shoes as you go through the airport line. But we might not be hitting people with the message that they want, right? They care more about accuracy. This is better at detecting threats than this other technology was. They care much more about security and privacy. Your data will be protected. And so if we focus on speed and convenience when trying to convince them that we should use this technology and they should trust us, we are missing an opportunity and we're missing the mark. And we would never know that if we didn't study this in depth. Right? So when should we work to understand public perceptions? The best time is at technology development program initiation. The second best time is wherever you are in your development right now. Right? So don't delay. But there are spots at every stage in the acquisition lifecycle or technology development lifecycle where you can insert information about public perception in order to improve your final outcome. And I'll just leave you with the consequences of getting it wrong and a final challenge. So what happens if a year from now, we come back and we have another example of how we had a technology implementation that went wrong? Well, obviously, we've lost time and we've lost money. We've had to start over. We've had to retrofit our technology. We've had to pull it out of the field and spend more to add, for example, privacy enhancing or privacy protecting software to it, right? Which, as taxpayers or soon to be taxpayers, if you're high school students, you don't want to see your government having to do that. But, and more importantly, we've lost trust. People no longer want to use the technology. They no longer will, automatically isn't the word I'm looking for, but the default position will not be to trust that the government is putting a safe technology in place. And that's dangerous for us. It's especially dangerous for us at DHS, because if we lose the public's trust in our technologies, then we actually end up lowering our security posture. We have worsened the problem. Instead of going through the body scanners, people will opt for a pat down, right? Which are less accurate. They decrease throughput, and we have worsened the problem of improving security at our checkpoints that we were trying to solve in the first place. So my challenge, as all of you sit in front of me as scientists and engineers, is that please think outside your comfort zone. Consider other aspects of your technology other than, does it work as I intended it to? Bring together multidisciplinary teams so that you hear diverse perspectives on the technology, the use case, and the user before you put it into circulation.
That's a great perception. Is important, right? I think it's not only the technology side, there are other aspects we should be thinking about. Any question, folks, from the audience? Yeah, go ahead, please.
My name is Sanjeev. When I was in grad school a long time back, I was working on something called Brain Lab. Okay, so it was about this thing. If you are disabled, you think the TV to be turned on. You cannot turn it on yourself. It will get turned on. So some signal get from the brain and got do that. So I don't know what the status of that in implementation. I presume that has been used. And there's a lot of secret things goes on. You of course know that before it is public. So everything has two sides of a coin, in my opinion. Okay, so a lot of just like nuclear bombs. So everything has two sides of a coin. There could be a lot of positive aspect of it, but at the same time, it actually invades the privacy of the person. Okay, so my question to you is, we say all men are created equal, so everything is same for everybody. So what is in today's technology context, how can we personalize like different things for different kind of people? Suppose you are spying on somebody's brain, then of course you don't need to have him or her to take up the shoes and go through the exact same process that 10,000 people going. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. So not everyone interacts with the technology in the same way, even if the technology is doing the same thing. So think like a checkpoint to enter the United States, right? How a US citizen interacts with the technology may be different, very different than how a visitor from another country entering the US interacts with the technology. And it's why we really need to, in some social science fields, we call this market segmentation, right? So there's not a single public perception, but there are perceptions that differ across different segments of the market, right? So your experience could differ based on, I think I mentioned, age, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, citizenship status, et cetera. And it's really important for us to understand the concerns from all of those different groups, especially, like if it's going to be at the border, maybe we really want to understand from, marginalized communities that live along the border, that cross the border on a regular basis, right? And it's important to take all those into account during development, but also to take all those into account when putting like standard operating procedures into place and when communicating with the public about why it's safe for them to use. Maybe they don't need to target me with that message as much, but they need to target, someone in this other group with that message much more, because the way the technology impacts them, the negative repercussions of using the technology for them might be greater, right? So it is really important that this is not one size fits all. You really need to think about your different segments of the market that matter.
Yeah, hello. My name is Peter Schulman. I'm an Aspire student working in quantum information science. So I work with quantum computers, which are definitely an emerging technology.
Mhm.
And I was wondering, because there's been so much recent hype around the technology in the public sphere, obviously public perception is a very fickle thing. So how quickly can negative public perception impact government endeavors when it pertains to new technologies?
Like that. You guys might be a little young for Orange is the New Black, right? But when that came out on Netflix, one of the backstories of someone was she was a TSA worker, and you saw her on the show doing you know, I don't even remember, but it not being a great TSA worker, right? And that had an immediate impact on public perception, right? The introduction of Chat GPT. Unfortunately, our AI survey went out before Chat GPT came out. I am dying to know if our results would be different if we fielded the exact same survey today. It takes one event, one technology, one news story, one, reference in pop culture to impact public perception. It's that quick.
Thank you.
Hi, so you mentioned public trust and the handling of that. Do you have any specific strategies surrounding transparency with these new technologies?
My recommendation always is that we're incredibly upfront and create communication strategies in advance of technologies rolling out that explain the use case, the benefits, and the risks, right? You can't, it's not enough to tell people this is the way that the technology is going to help you, because then you're kind of cherry picking information. You have to be upfront about any limitations or risks to the technology as well, obviously while maintaining a security posture. But I think transparency is incredibly important, and transparency has to be proactive. So often in the government, we end up being reactive. Like, we put out a new technology, people don't like it. We start trending on social media in a bad way, and then we go out and react, and we start trying to put a strategic communication plan in place. That's not sufficient, right? Transparency requires being proactive in your approach.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Soma. I am an Aspire intern and a high school senior. So
Yeah, it's a little quieter on this
is
side.
this good? Okay. Hi, I'm Soma. I'm an Aspire intern and a high school senior. So earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that the government only spends 13% of their efforts on STEM projects that cost at least $6 million. So I was wondering, what do you think is the root cause of society's lack of interest in investing in STEM research? And is the ethical concern a main cause of that?
So there's a multitude of reasons why technology products don't succeed within the federal government. I don't want you to leave thinking that all of them are because of public perception or workforce acceptance issues. There's additional administrative issues around, the budget cycle and the procurement process within government. And there's lots of good studies, at places like the Harvard Kennedy School about how those processes, because they're long and slow, and because the federal government is a very large bureaucracy, and necessary in many cases to ensure that we are doing the right thing with taxpayer dollars, but they don't necessarily, the timeline that our budget and procurement cycles are under do not align with the speed at which technology advances, right? And that can cause a disconnect that leads to implementation failures as well.
I'm afraid we're just going to have time for one more question, please.
Thank you for your speech. I am a junior student from PRISMS, and I have currently two research subjects in progress. And the first one is creating an autonomous clip-on component for intravenous stands in hospitals for easier infusion, and the other one is a standing mobility device targeted at people with lower limb difficulties. So as you can see, both of my projects are sort of related to medical perspectives, and when it comes to human health, people tend to be really cautious about these stuff. And so it's a matter of trust, as you mentioned in your speech. So I really want to know, how can I, or maybe for public's perspective, push my projects to like a greater extent that maybe the public or like the people that are concerned about human health that can, make my projects trustworthy for those people. Thank you.
So obviously understanding the concerns and addressing them at the forefront is number one. The other thing that I'll mention is, as you break down public perceptions, we usually find that there's a use case that people are in favor of, right? People are in favor of using AI to identify child victims of crime. Okay, great. That's a very important use case that we can match with this technology. Let's do that first, right? Let's do that first. Let's show that we can do it effectively without like privacy incidents or other issues. And then once we've built the trust in that use case where people already want us to work, then we can start branching into use cases that have lower public support, right? But we've already built that trust at the beginning.
Thank you.